my consciousness had stepped back and was watching the war between the thoughts. And it was a jolt to me. And I realized that I was caught in something that wasn't really substantial, solid, and real. But at the same time, I realized, well, why can't I just be all of that? I can be the part that wants a chocolate bar. I can be the part that doesn't, that took the vow. These are not mutually exclusive of one another. And I could just sit with all of it.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. Today, my guest is Donald Altman. He is an author, a psychotherapist, and a former monk. And we're going to be talking about mindfulness, spirituality, addiction resolution, and his new book, Travelers. But first, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of my guests, and read a little bio on myself. There is also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. As I said, my guest today is Donald Altman. Donald is an author of over 20 books. Donald is very open and honest about his own personal path to dealing with some of the issues that he had as a very young man and beyond. He found himself going to a monastery, a Tibetan monastery, and that is where he began his practice of mindfulness. Later on, he became a psychotherapist so he could help people with eating disorders, PTSD, schizophrenia, and other psychiatric mental health issues. He is a delightful guy, another Midwesterner such as myself, so we hit it off big time. He's very funny, he's very warm, and very open about himself. And then we talk about his new book, Travelers, and I'm going to let him explain that in the interview. So here he is. This is Donald Altman. Good morning, Donald. It's so great to have you on. We had just had a nice little chat that I probably should have recorded, but I didn't.
Well, thanks, Bob. Yeah, I really had fun just having that chat. I thought that, wow, if we were recording this would be good. We were just talking a little about our lives and just about life in general and aging and how things change and our perspectives. And I loved your story about how you moved from doing the work in showbiz and then how you kind of changed from that toward doing, psychotherapy and body work and things related to wellness. And it's interesting, a similar path to me, actually.
Yeah. What did you have any specific thing going on that sort of sent you in that direction, or was it just a bunch of things that kind of came together?
Yeah, no, it was some things that happened that caused suffering in my life, actually. I mean, I had co-created one of the first interactive comic strips, and I had an office on Wilshire Boulevard in LA, and it was funded by America Online. You remember them?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
They had something called the Greenhouse Project. So we had an interactive comic strip called The Zombie Detective, and have a fun time trying to find that today. It's as if it completely disappeared from the internet and from the world. But although we were the first ones to do it, and it just didn't catch on fast enough. And AOL had kind of an antiquated system for doing animations and making it interactive. Nowadays, it'd be a lot easier to do. It wasn't their fault. It was just where the technology was at that time. And so when that ended, I was like at a real low point. I had high hopes for that. And there were some other things happening within the relationship with me and that other co-founder that really repeated an old pattern for me in my life. And when it happened, I was devastated. But I started wondering, why did this happen? Why did this happen again? This old pattern that seems to recur. Previously, I had met this monk. Actually, there was somebody that said to me, "There's a monk I'd like you to meet." And I met this monk, and he was a well-known teaching monk from Burma. His name was Uthilananda. I'd written a book called The Four Foundations of Mindfulness. Really wonderful guy. And I only met him for about 15, 20 minutes, but I sensed this. It was like a palpable feeling that you get from, I had never experienced that before, especially growing up on the streets, kind of the hard streets of Chicago where I grew up, right? I'd never met anybody like that. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, how does somebody become like that? With this sense of availability, openness, compassion. And I wondered, what did he learn? Because we're not born like that. So I knew he had to learn that somewhere. So after this thing happened with with that company and my feeling devastated and recognizing that pattern, I realized I could ordain with him as a monk in the monastery, which was outside of LA near the San Bernardino Mountains. And he was the Sayadaw is what they called him, the abbot, the head of the monastery. And so I thought, well, here's an opportunity for me to learn from him. And I was in a lot of pain, right? And sometimes, it's everybody's trying to avoid pain, and we do it in different ways. But if we're able to use that pain to propel us forward, actually it could be beneficial. It could be a gift, like a seed, hidden inside that pain. And that's what happened to me. So I went in and the teachings that I got there and the support and my own spiritual discipline, which is something I never had before. It's funny, when you go in that tradition, it was the Theravada old school of Buddhism. When you go in, they give you a name. It's like you shed your old personality, your persona, all that. And so they give you a name, and they chose a name for me, and Uwarama. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And later I asked one of the monks, so why did, and they're all up there, they're kind of joking around and looking at you and thinking about things. And finally they decided on this name. And I thought, I wonder why they gave me that. But it meant right effort. It was one of the Noble Eightfold Paths, which is effort. And it's something that I had never really applied to my spiritual life. And that kind of struck me when I realized what that name was. And I really did put in the effort when I was there. I wasn't there for a long time, but I think I was ripe because of the suffering and things that had happened in my life to really learn from them and to really just absorb and take it in. And, I left the monastery, and there's a beautiful ceremony for leaving as well, which is great. So it was a real spiritual initiation for me, and I'm very grateful for that and for the monks. And I still actually stay in contact with some of the monks. When I left, it turned my life in a whole new direction, and that's where I started doing workshops on the spiritual aspects of eating and food. And people would come up to me after the workshops, and they'd say, "Oh, I have this anorexia problem, this bulimia problem, whatever, and can you help me?" And I didn't know how to work with those. So I went back to school, something I never thought I would do. Went back to grad school at 50 and became a psychotherapist. So it was and then I worked in an eating disorder clinic afterwards for some years, and worked in psychiatric clinics and had my own clinic. And, it's really a beautiful thing when you see people who are, yes, they're in pain, they're struggling, but they're trying to do something better for themselves. And that's beautiful. The idea that I could at least assist in some way. It wasn't me doing it for them. It was them who were doing it. If, I had people who came in and said, I have this, what do I need to do here? That, please, Donald, tell me what to do. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Because if it works, yeah, you'll feel it wasn't your idea anyway. And if it doesn't work, who are you going to blame? You're going to blame me. So I want it to come from them, right? So anyway, So that's how I kind of got on this path, Bob.
I remember reading something about people talk about certain people who are self-taught as if there is some other way to learn.
Right.
And it really is that. And did you have an eating disorder or
I had emotional eating. Yeah. I
yeah.
really struggled with food, and I never made a cookie I didn't like. And I never made a pie I didn't like. I mean, a whole pie if I could eat it. And, you know, and it was interesting. We actually went at that day that I got ordained in the monastery. Yeah, you go through it. It was like a beautiful, 2.5, 3 hour initiation on a grassy field and with the other monks. And I'm reading these ancient, readings from 2,600 years ago. And then I came back, and they lead you back, and they said, "Oh, here's you're going to be staying." It was a little room. There were 2 other novice monks and me, and 3 mattresses on the floor. And so I just went and took one of the mattresses, and I'm sitting there. And, that's when kind of buyer's remorse hit you, like, oh my God, what have I done? They'd shaved off, I had hair, they shaved off my hair. And before I went to the room, I went to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and I said, oh my God, I've turned into Uncle Festus.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
Yeah.
So you get buyer's remorse, and I'm sitting there. And then, and I realized, wow, wish I had something to eat. That would make me feel better right now, And this was my old go-to method of covering up unpleasant feelings. And so I looked, I don't know, I looked to my left, there was a bookshelf there. And on this bookshelf, I swear to God, I couldn't believe my eyes, was a giant Cadbury's chocolate bar. They used to make them. You had to be a weightlifter to lift this thing up. Yeah. And, and my first thought was, who set me up? Because I had taken a vow not to eat after 12 noon. I took this vow. Here it is, like, I don't know, 3, 4 in the afternoon. And I wanted this chocolate bar more than anything. And I thought somebody put this chocolate bar on that shelf to test me. And of course, it wasn't the case. I found out later that the monks, people would donate things to the monks, and they'd put them, in different places just around the monastery. And they didn't know I was going to sit on that that mattress anyway. But suddenly I went into a war in my mind. And, I want this chocolate bar. No, you can't have, you just took a vow not to eat after, afternoon. And this back and forth war was going on. And, normally, what would I have done? I'd have distracted. I'd have gone outside, watched TV. Maybe I'd have gone to the deli and got some rice pudding, or I'd get a chocolate bar, or, whatever. But I couldn't do that. I had to sit and watch those thoughts. It was agonizing at first. And sometimes something happened. After about an hour, suddenly, it's like, I don't know, it's like a light switched on, or all of a sudden it's as if my consciousness had stepped back and was watching the war between the thoughts. And it was a jolt to me. And I realized that I was caught in something that wasn't substantial, solid, and real. But at the same time, I realized, well, why can't I just be all of that? I can be the part that wants a chocolate bar. I can be the part that doesn't, that took the vow. These are not mutually exclusive of one another. And I could just sit with all of it. And that was a beautiful moment for me. I mean, it allowed me to have acceptance for different parts of me that maybe I didn't like, or found things I found hard to tolerate, right? And I think it's so important that we allow ourselves to reflect inwardly. And that's what happened to me. I reflected, and rather than just suddenly you respond to an impulse or react to an impulse. And I think that, in our world today, our attention is being drawn outward all the time. We look at screens, we're being stimulated by things all the time visually, and our visual attention takes about 60 to 70% of our awareness. And so how can we, find the time to reflect inwardly and and I think that's where some insights can occur. That, you talked about self-learning, right? and I think we can get lessons and learn in a lot of different ways, but we need to reflect on things that are happening to us and think about them a little more and observe a little more. Harness our awareness in a way that serves us. When somebody has a pop-up ad or whatever and you're responding to that, they're grabbing your consciousness. Do you want people to be grabbing your consciousness and taking you away to the things they want you to do, right? Or do you want to have the intentional ability to train yourself, train your mind to be of service to you? Because every day we have, some 20,000 thoughts. I mean, think about that. I've often, when I do workshops, I'll ask people in the audience, I'll say, has anybody counted the number of thoughts you had this morning? Right? And it's just like, it's impossible. You have too many, right? The Buddha thought we had as many as 3,000 thought moments per second. I mean, it's incredible whether or not we have that many. We do know we have about 20,000 thoughts a day, but how many of those thoughts tell you something really profound about who you are? How many are helpful thoughts or useful thoughts? How many are habitual thoughts, conditioned thoughts, or even just random toxic thoughts that occur, distressing thoughts. And research has shown that happens too. We just randomly have these distressing thoughts. Now, the thing is, you can just notice those thoughts, or you can grab onto them. And if you grab on or identify with that thought, it's going to pull you in a direction, right? So you have an anxious thought. If you grab onto that, you might be pulled into panic or anxiety eventually. You can grab onto rumination. It'll pull you into taking you out of this present moment and pull you into a dark place. And maybe you'll spiral into depression. It's amazing what awareness, I think of awareness, consciousness is a kind of a primordial organizing energy, right? And we can harness it.
I always talk about thought management is really the idea of having a life that works for you rather than against you. And I have repetitive thoughts, and they're the thoughts that I thought the day before, and then they become a habit. And I ask myself one question: is it working for you?
Yeah. And
sometimes I have to shake my head and go, stop.
I think that is a great question. And when I also like the question, does it serve, or how's it working? Is it working for you? Is it working for others in your life? Right? Because we're not alone. We're never really isolated. So it's a twofold way of looking at it, of course. And I think it's an important question for everybody to ask. For people that might be overusing technology, for example. Technology is a wonderful gift. Without it, we couldn't have this wonderful conversation. I wouldn't see you. I feel like, if I was in the same location with you, we'd be meeting for coffee every week.
Probably.
Right? Yeah, I think so. Two Midwestern guys having coffee.
I miss the twang of the Midwest. My wife always makes fun of me for saying, how do you say the word B-A-C-K? I say back.
Back, yeah.
I gotta go back. There's now you worked with eating disorders. I talk a lot about on this show. I get to interview a lot of people with different types of addictions. It's kind of just a different deck chair on the Titanic is how I see a lot of these things. And there's two things that come up quite a bit. The main one is trauma. Usually some kind of a childhood trauma or a series of traumas or perceived traumas, real or imagined. And some kind of maybe a biological predisposition, a genetic predisposition. And I always wonder about, what is the balance of that? And does one overcome the other? And, but the idea of either getting high to avoid an unpleasant feeling or to eat, gamble, maybe an addiction could even be rage, anger, because that's a high, an adrenaline rush. So you don't have to really feel the pain part, but it all comes down to some kind of pain somewhere, and the fear of really looking at it. Because I think what for me it was like, when I'm in pain, I think if I really go into it, I mean, I've learned to know that that's okay to do that and it's not going to kill me, but that's what it feels like. It feels like death.
Yeah.
And that's the really scary part about looking at things, super honestly. You feel like, if I really allow this to come to the forefront, it will destroy me.
I think that is a very honest way of looking at it, that it's the fear that's stopping people from going more deeply, because there's some deep belief they have that is maybe hidden, that they feel that somehow they can't exist or live without that. And so the ego is going to try to protect that and defend that, right? Whatever that is, they feel they need that maybe in some way it's actually protecting them. It's helping them to keep that intact. And so it's extremely frightening and scary for people to go to that place. There was an interesting series of conversations, I don't know if you knew about this, between a guy named Krishnamurti and David Bohm. Krishnamurti was a kind of a spiritual teacher in the last century, and his life story is fascinating. He grew up in India near the Theosophical Society in the late 1800s, and he died in 1990s, I think. But where he grew up, this Theosophical Society, kind of a spiritualistic society run by this Madame Blavatsky. I mean, it's a very exotic, almost strange story. But they found him and his brother, and was very interested in these things about, he used to hang out at the society, and then at the age of 17 he started to have some visions, and they thought, you know what, he's the next enlightened being. And they took him and his brother, Krishnamurti and his brother, they brought him to England. They had a classical British education, I think at Oxford. And then they started promoting him as the next great spiritual guru and teacher. Well, at the age of, his late 20s, Krishnamurti rejected them. He said, I'm nobody's guru. And he became known, and he has and he eventually moved to Santa Barbara, Ojai. And in Ojai, there's a Krishnamurti Foundation. But and he gave teachings, and he was it was non-denominational, but it was a very fascinating man. And he teamed up at one point with a physicist by the name of David Bohm, Bohm, who passed away just not too long ago. And David Bohm, of course, was very steeped in quantum theory, and they had these fascinating conversations. But together they talked about how to let go of what they called your absolute necessity. That thing you thought you can't live without. And what are those absolute necessities we have? Maybe about our country, about our family, about loyalty, about whatever that is. And actually, when I've taught classes, used to teach some classes at the Lewis and Clark Graduate School of Education and Counseling, and I would have the grad students engage in this kind of thing, and most of them could not go there. Most of them, and they're going to be counselors, but they couldn't go there. And it just shows you how scary that is, right? To really look at the things that we think that we could not absolutely give up. But unless you look at your absolute necessities and are willing to at least set them aside for a little bit, how could you really have an open conversation with somebody? How could you allow yourself to connect with another, in a creative, open way? And I think that's what we see a lot in our culture and in our world. These different camps that are fighting one another, they are not letting go of what their absolute necessity is, and so they end up blaming the other. You don't have this think like I do, you're wrong, I'm right, or whatever. And I think it really goes back to that, what you're saying about pain, that somehow this absolute necessity is, they think this is going to protect them somehow, when actually it's not a paradox. They need to maybe release it or let go of it or observe it or examine it in some deeper way.
The first time I was asked this question, which is what you're talking about, it really confused me. And the question was, would you rather be right or happy? And I didn't even see a connection. I was like, well, how can you be wrong and happy? Yeah, that's impossible. I want both. And not only that, I want to convince you of my right. So you'll know, because you're not doing it right. And I am. And that question really confused. And I went home after that question and I was like, God damn it, that's not right to ask me that question. So I'm doing it while I'm debating the thing. And boy, my mind just fought that like crazy. And I'm sure I do it all day long, where I have certain needs for my identity that are really important to me. And as much as I like to think that I'm open-minded, and I probably am, more or less than other people, I don't know. But as much as I like to think that I'm open-minded, even that is an identity. I'm the open-minded guy,
Right.
So you can just mess with yourself so crazy, and how do you, it's like, when do you know, and when does it go into madness? Because you can't,
Yeah.
it almost feels like that sometimes. You go, well, if nothing if everything is tenuous and arbitrary and I'm picking these things, what is the real thing? And how do I know I'm actually not doing it again, thinking that I'm not? I love that kind of stuff, because it's like trying to think about infinity almost.
Right. It's kind of, for me, it'd be like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube, which I've never been able to do.
No, I don't even like picking it up. I just like, somebody hand me that thing, get it away from me. I'm not doing that. But I had a moment when I was, I guess, when you're for a lot of people, at least it was for me, when I was a teenager, you're very sort of aware that you're becoming an adult, and how am I going to figure out my life? But you're also rebellious. Your brain isn't quite connected from the whatever those two parts from the front to the back, the amygdala or whatever that sort of biological thing that happens. But I remember being very flip-flopping between anger and sadness and a lot of confusion. And I said to this friend of mine who was a year younger than me, I must have been 17 and he was like 16. I said, I feel like I want to go crazy. I was so pent up. And he starts laughing and he goes, well, why don't you? And I went, what do you mean? He goes, do it. And I remember, like, I don't know how he knew to say something like that, but he was sort of laughing about it in a way that he was evolved.
It's almost like a paradoxical therapy. Yeah.
It was, and I went, you know what? He's right. I can throw off these mental restrictions that I've been fed. And so that was the beginning of trying to do, more creative things and not conform to what I was being told I needed to do in order to be, quote, happy and successful. It was the beginning. It didn't, it wasn't like some white light epiphany, but it was a moment. It was a moment of clarity, which I define as clearer than the moment before it, but not probably all that clear.
Well, that's kind of like a good definition of enlightenment, right? I mean, we have moments where we see things more clearly, and maybe where the I, the me, the my, and the mind get out of the way, right? What are those moments when we get that, when we can get beyond that identification system that is in place? And that was one of the things I wanted to do. If we could talk for a moment about my book, Traveler, my new book.
I would love to do that. I was leading up to that next. So I'm glad you did it.
Well, I think it's a good segue because I think that's kind of the key of this book, because you have the main character, this very rational, logical psychiatrist, and he is confronted with this traveling pet therapist. She calls herself Traveler Jackie, traveling pet therapist, and her sentient canine, and she's able to manifest things and do things that are out of our normal sense of reality. And then this young patient, suicidal young man, comes to the clinic, and he has an experience with Traveler, and there's bilocation and these things happening that this guy thinks he's going crazy, and it really, because he has a mindset that everything is mechanical, that everything is supposed to make sense, that science is really the ultimate arbiter of what reality is, right? When in truth, he comes to this, he finally opens up and allows himself to be guided with this Traveler, becomes a guide of his. And I call her a traveler, and the story's called Travelers. I didn't want to say these are angels or these are this or that, but I think there are catalyzing energies that can propel us forward in different ways, and it can take many, many different forms. And but we need to be open to those energies. And it's funny. I heard a interesting. It was a book review program, and I heard this guy was interviewed. He writes these horror books, and he has all these paranormal, weird things happening in the books. And the interviewer asked him. She said, "So do you think that those things really happen? That there can be things outside our normal reality like that?" And he says, "Oh, I don't believe it at all, but it scares people. That's why I put it in my books." I'm like, and he's heard people tell these stories, but he's never experienced it, so he doesn't believe it. But I think there's something to that we all are wired, I think, to have direct experiences that take us beyond the ordinary realm of being. Even in dreams, when you think about it, it's a subtle energy space where we experience different kinds of reality, perhaps. But even in our waking space, we can open ourselves up and experience different kinds of, it's a mystery, and really enter the mystery, enter the wonder of it all. And if we can be open in that way, we've been talking about openness in a lot, and there are a lot of different kinds of openness. There's openness to understanding the schemas or the belief systems you have, and, being an open-minded person. But there's also openness of awareness, of consciousness. And I think that can move us to overcome a lot of the fear we have. It's a different way of approaching. I had one thing I didn't tell you when we were talking earlier. I had a lot of trauma growing up, and in the family, my family of origin, and I had a major depressive disorder in my early 20s, where depression. I felt like I was carrying 100-pound weights on me. I was just so heavy and weighed down and almost non-functional, and just didn't think there was any reason to live anymore. And at around that same time, I started to experience these non-ordinary consciousness. Some people might call it OBE, out-of-body experience, but and I didn't try to define it. I just allowed myself. I remember when the first time it happened, and I just said, "I'm just going to observe. I'm not going to try to stop this." And it gave me a sense of relief, actually, as if, wow, I'm not just this depression or this condition that I'm mired in. There's more to me. There's more to the universe. There's a mystery here. And it was like a release valve for me. And I think it was a spiritual initiation. Sometimes I think when we go through really tough times, the doorway might open for us to see things like this. And I don't think it's pathological. And I think it's a normal thing. Some of us may have a greater proclivity to connect with these things, but I think we all have it. We all come, our creative impulse, where does that come from? Right? We don't know. So I think there are a lot of interesting questions. And so for this character in the story, it's also a story of how do you overcome grief? Because the backstory for the psychiatrist is that he has lost his child. He and his wife have lost their beautiful 18-year-old daughter. And so it's really also very much a story of this family and how do they survive this loss? Because he can't heal himself. He's healing, he's working as a psychiatrist, healing other people. He can't solve his own grief, and how he and his wife are grieving in very different ways. So it raises that whole issue of loss. And I think loss, is fundamental, actually, if you're a human being. Loss is fundamental to our experience. It doesn't mean that there aren't the good things, too. There isn't the joy, but we all have to deal with loss. We all have to deal with grief in this life. And that's something that drives people into addiction or into maladaptive ways of coping.
It's a terrible feeling, but it happens to everybody in some way, whether it's, the severe one is obviously a loss of a child, but there's loss of relationships, loss of jobs.
Yeah.
There's so many losses that you have. And, because we're very self-involved, we think it's, well, nobody feels it like I do, Yeah, they do.
Well, and that, and I just had a thought as you said that. It's kind of like going back to the eating disorder. It's like, but you can control what you put into your body. Mm-hmm. So in a way, what we're kind of doing with these maladaptive, we're trying to take control of what we can, even though the world around us is out of control. I can't control that loss that happened to me. I can't control this traumatic condition I'm in, but at least I can control this one thing.
And then that becomes a thing you can't control. It turns into out of control.
Yeah.
I think maybe the only thing you can control is your relationship to the universe, the higher power, the whatever you want to call it. That's something you can actually, without any outside influence, that inner life, that connection to the force that animates this is about all that you can really control. And then the irony is when you start to do that, then the other things become easier to deal with. At least for me, that's been the case.
And that's the spiritual part of our being, right? Connecting to something that is greater than ourselves. And, I think we're caught in kind of especially in the mental health field, it's caught in kind of a mechanical, materialistic view of things that, take that medication. And medications can have a good use for certain people, but the idea that we can just quickly heal ourselves, when sometimes, grief might last a lifetime, for example. And yet even that, so mental health, having these feelings, instead of being contextualized as being, well, this is what's happening in my life, and so I'm reacting to this, or these are my belief systems. We pathologize, you've got this, you've got that. We slap a label on somebody so you can get insurance will pay for it, these diagnostic codes, right? There's even a diagnostic code now for what's called prolonged grief disorder. So if you don't get over
If you being alive.
If you don't get over your grief in a year, there's something wrong with you.
366 days, we're going to give you that new diagnosis.
Right. And it actually caused a bit of a controversy in the mental health field now, because a lot of grief experts are just like, are you kidding me? You're calling that, you're stigmatizing grief.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting thing that you just talked about that I find incredibly counterproductive to all well-being, which is a label. Any kind of label, it can be very so limiting that it can't encompass the whole person, because it's a label. It's a very specific, and I find it, even in whether you're diagnosing a health condition or a political party, or you're this. And and you're this, and what this means to me is, and the this might mean something different to you or the other guy. So you've got this label, and it's all of a sudden and you know what it is? It's fear again, because the fear is, if I don't label it and I can't quantify it, then it'll get away from me and it'll be dangerous. And
I can't control it. Yeah.
And it's a simplification of something that isn't simple, which is called being alive. It's not simple. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'd like to help you, but I can't.
I had clients come in and, they've got that label on. I'm a bipolar. I'm a depressive. I'm a this. I'm a that. And what's interesting, though, is that not all with everybody, but sometimes I've found that story changed as I work with them, and they change the narrative and they broaden it out, and they begin to, say, well, maybe I'm not that label.
Most people are more than just one thing. I mean,
absolutely.
We're filled with inconsistencies and possibilities. I mean, it's an interesting thing. You can really live a life that's not so rigid mentally, if you make that choice to go, well, maybe I'm, who's to say? Somebody told me that I'm this, maybe I'm not that. Yeah.
If you want to make a good meal, you're gonna have a lot of messy plates around. You're gonna have a messy kitchen, but it's gonna be a delicious meal.
So it's 10:05. You said you had to get off.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
All right. I apologize for the technical difficulties, because I would love to have talked to you even longer. Maybe we'll have to do another one, because
that would be great
down the road, because you're delightful. And
well,
you're
thank
from
you.
The Midwest. I mean,
really loved. Yeah, those two things alone, right? Being in the Midwest, I think, is the key to the happiness.
Down to earth. There's not a lot to do there, so you might as well be nice to each other. Folks, get Donald's book, Travelers, and we'll talk to him again. We'll figure it out. And we as me, it's not
Well, thank you, my friend.
Like I've got some big organization. It's just me.
Well, you're special in my book, Bob, and thank you. And I hope you continue doing this show and helping people open their minds.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You have a beautiful day.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. Check out the website, theexplodinghuman.com, the YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Big thanks to Donald Altman for coming on the show. Check out his new book, Travelers, and have a fantastic day. Thanks.